The first basic course in engineering is engineering statics. And in that, it's kind of like boot camp. That's how it was when I took it, and I thought that was great. It disciplines you to first define the problem you're going to solve. What is the problem? What are you being asked for? What are you given? Draw a line across the page. What are you going to find? Draw a line across the page. Now, what is the steps you're using to solve it? And I remember at first, the problems were easy, and the students would say, well, this is boring, and they want to skip. Do this and get in the habit of doing it, and for the rest of your life, problems will be a lot easier to solve. And they would get pretty frustrated with it, and they'd go home and they'd want to watch TV. So here they are filling out the busy work, they think, on their paper, and then once they've filled it out, they go, well, this is easy to solve, and go ahead and solve it.
So it's sort of like learning the times tables when you're young.
Yeah, it's just there, and that makes it easy. So when you get in this habit of first define the problem before you can solve it, you got to know where you're going. Like, if you get in your car to drive someplace, you want to know where you're going to go first.
Well, yes.
You're going around in circles.
Usually, yeah.
Direction.
A destination is good to have.
Yep, so that's important. Now, what's the harm in starting out with who done it?
Well, you got to find out what happened first.
Oh, Ashley is suspicious. Oh, I think she must have done it. Let's go prosecute her now. Let's see. What can we find on her? What evidence, to prove whatever we think. You aren't solving the real problem. You're solving an imagined problem. And actually, as for cover-ups, that is the easiest tool that is used in cover-ups.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And we're going to cover the cover-up in full. Probably I'd say around the second hour, Dr. Judy. But let's get back into like.
Well, but the thing, just touch on this a little bit about how the cover-ups work. See, if you skip determining what the problem is, and then jump to how it was done.
Yes.
You haven't defined what it was that was done. The only way you can say how it was done was to assume what it was. So you're solving an imagined problem, not a real problem.
And you know what they say when you assume, right?
It's an imaginary problem.
Yeah, you make an ass out of you and me, they say, right?
But that's why it's so important to first determine what happened.
Absolutely.
And that otherwise it's just biased, and you're cherry picking data to support some fantasy that you've thought of. So how cover-ups work is to get people to dive into how it was done, so they're all solving an assumed problem. You can never, ever, ever solve the real problem by solving an imagined problem.
That is so true. And isn't it true, like, the first thing that happens is, say it's like a murder victim. Somebody finds a murder victim. They call the police. What's the first thing they do when the police get there? They section off the crime scene, don't they? To protect the evidence so they can examine it later to find out what happened, how the person was murdered.
Right, to determine what happened. But this issue for easy ways to cover things up is to get people to assume what happened. Then you don't need to cover anything up.
So true.
Because nobody's looking at it. They're looking at wherever you've led them to look at it instead of looking at really what happened.
Oh, exactly. Yes, definitely. That is so true. We're going to cover that in great detail, the cover-up, because it's very important.
Right, but that's how it's done. That's why that step of first defining what to solve is important. And after you determine what happened, you look at for example, if the building was destroyed, you look at the destructive mechanism. After you've determined what happened, it will help you understand the destructive mechanism.
Well, absolutely, yes. And so let's get back to their official story is that 19 Arabs with box cutters commandeered three planes. Two of them supposedly smashed into the World Trade Center, and a third one into the Pentagon. Actually, with 4 planes, they say. Another one in a field in Pennsylvania. So that's theory number 1. Theory number 2 was...
That's their story.
It's a story, yeah. It's like watching a Die Hard movie.
Okay.
It really is. It's like watching a Die Hard movie.
And then you're giving it like a false choice. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, then you're given a false choice, which would be like thermite, nanothermite, or, something like that,
Right, and if people don't like that false choice, then you got to give them another one.
Mini nukes and stuff like that. The third choice, and they just keep coming up with choices, and they keep you running around And
so you don't, yeah, as I say, if you don't like to lie behind door number 1, 19 bad guys with box cutters, we'll show you to lie behind door number 2. Thermite. Well, once you start smelling that one not so good, then they'll show you to lie behind door number 3, nukes. And then if that one doesn't work for you, we'll show you to lie behind door number 4. Whatever it's doing is keeping your attention looking behind those doors rather than turning around looking at the wide open field of evidence right behind you.
We call that disinfo.
But it's very distracting. And if you have a good-looking babe lure you into one of those rooms, or Boy Scouts lure you into one of those rooms, that works in our culture.
Oh, like a good-looking babe, sort of like the Matrix, the woman in the red dress, right?
The people say, that's a good place to go. And they said, why do they use babes to sell cars?
Well, yeah, because they're just looking at the babe instead of the price of the car.
Yep. And so the same kind of thing. So it's important to start with the evidence, but if you're busy getting funneled into various theories or stories, you're not looking at what happened.
Absolutely. So let's start with the official government story that NIST committed fraud, because they're part of the cover-up as well. And you took this to the Supreme Court, a Qui-Tam case, and we'll get into that. The biggest issue I had with NIST, amongst other things, is that they were mandated by Congress to determine why and how the towers, quote, collapsed. Yes. And
they didn't do that. And actually, I brought up this one diagram they had in the report that shows this tipping top of Tower 2. I said that violates the laws of physics if you have a rigid body that tips over and stops tipping. And, it turns out that proves it wasn't a rigid body. But I said it violates the laws of physics. And they answered me on that saying, oh, no, it doesn't. Our analysis doesn't violate the laws of physics because we didn't analyze the collapse.
That's amazing. Repeat that, please.
They said it does, the collapse analysis or whatever doesn't violate the laws of physics because they didn't analyze the collapse. They only analyzed the building while it was still standing. So while it was still standing, it obeyed the laws of physics.
Well, of course it's going to while it's still standing.
And what they did was generate, or have their contractors generate, a possible hypothetical scenario. In other words, an imaginary problem. And that's what they produced.
Yes, an imaginary problem. So let's start with first. Let's start with NIST, whatever they came up with, whatever Fantasyland story they came up with. They say it was a pancake collapse, Dr. Judy.
Oh, I don't know if they changed that one, I think, later on.
I think you're right. They did change that later on.
It's after my billiard ball thing came out, which, the billiard ball thing, instead of every 10 floors, it was, I did that as well as every floor. You go floor by floor by floor by floor, that's over 100 or about 100 seconds.
Yeah, but here's the thing, but obviously it wasn't a collapse, because if the building collapsed, I believe it was 500 million...
500,000 tons. Yeah, this is, very simply put for those who are listening that, would like to know why it wasn't a collapse, why the buildings didn't slam to the ground. They didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground. Most of the building turned into dust in midair.
And you can see that with your own eyes.
Yeah, you see it turning into dust. And that was my biggest problem on day one, is this building looked like it's frothing up into, like an Alka-Seltzer tablet, effervescing. And if it had slammed to the ground, boom, it'd be a big seismic signal. Let's go look at the seismic charts. Nope, didn't happen. It was much smaller, and not only that, the signal did not travel through the earth. Remember, we're taught about S and P waves, that they rise at different rates to the seismic station?
Yes.
And that lag time, at first the P wave comes, then the S wave comes, the shear wave, that tells you about how far away the epicenter is because of the different rates of travel through the earth. And there's also a surface wave. Well, as it turns out, when the World Trade Center towers went away, there was no detectable S or P wave. In other words, you hit a rock with a hammer, it rings like a tuning fork. That didn't happen.
Right, now how can that be if the building supposedly collapsed, all the the concrete and steel smashed to the ground. You'd have
it couldn't have slammed to the ground and have that day. And this is not just one recording station, but all the recording stations in the area. Now, these recording stations, Building 7 was even more dramatic. But what was recorded was the surface wave. Why would you get a surface wave? Well, if you, like, let's say King Kong reached over and picked up those towers and chucked them up into space, just took the weight off the ground, that ground is recovering like you're getting off your mattress in the morning.
That's true. Like there's like a little indentation in your mattress and that it eventually
right. And
goes
you have
back
these
to normal.
2 500,000-ton buildings going away. It's going to create a surface wave. But those were not waves that went through the earth, like S&P waves. And the surface wave for Building 7 was a 0.6. That's like a jackhammer.
And that's like the equivalent. You couldn't even hear it. Like, you didn't even hear it. You could hear the audible people speaking when Building 7 went away, but you couldn't hear the building go away. It was so strange.
Right. Let me read a quote by one of the first responders, Michael Ober. He said, "I don't remember the sound of the building hitting the ground. Somebody told me that it was measured on the Richter scale. I don't know how true that is. If the building's hitting the ground that hard, how do I not remember the sound of it?"
That says it all right there. That's from a first responder.
And Building 2 went away while Building 1 was still standing. Some of the firefighters who came out of Building 1, they thought they came out in the wrong direction because they thought a building was supposed to be there and there wasn't a building there. They were disoriented. They didn't know that Tower 2 had gone away.
Exactly. And we're going to cover that in the next minute or so. But I'd like to talk about the bathtub not being destroyed. Okay,
that's another thing. If the buildings had slammed to the ground, a lot of people don't realize that the towers were built on bedrock 70, that's 7 times 10, 70 feet below the water table in the Hudson River. So they built this dike around the base of the building. We call it the bathtub. It's sort of like the reverse of a bathtub. It keeps the water out. So they could build the building on bedrock. And so there's like 7 big stories that go down underground, and water is kept out. So when if you're going to smash those buildings to the ground, you're surely going to break the dike. Didn't happen. Not only that, there's a little segment of a 8-story building, Building 6, that remained afterwards. And they didn't want to use dynamite on it because they were afraid of damaging the bathtub wall. Instead, they used cranes and pulled it down.
And didn't the backhoes cause more damage than the towers going away?
Yep. The bathtub wall did get damaged, but not from the towers dropping on it. It was from the earth-moving equipment they brought in afterwards. And as soon as they realized that, there's like a big crack opening up in Liberty Street, and the wall was being pushed in. They developed some new rules that no, I call them mega cranes, no big mega crane could be within X number of feet of another mega crane. They had to be on wooden platforms that distributed out the weight, and there's a lot of different rules and monitoring that went into place at that time. So it's clear that the buildings had not slammed to the ground.
And I remember going to, they called it Ground Zero, and in particular where the towers once stood, they called that area the pit. And I went there and I looked at it.
The pile, yeah.
Well, it was after the pile was taken away.
Oh.
It was just the bathtub was left, and they called that the pit. And I looked at it with my own eyes, and there was very little damage.
Somebody who was reading my book emailed me and accidentally referred to it as the skateboard park.
Well, yeah, it was.
This nice, cement walls all over the place.
It did. It kind of did look like that. So, we're going to go to a quick break.
Okay.
Judy, when we come back,
all right,
we're going to talk about the so-called jump. We'll talk about the.
Oh, there was one other thing that proves that buildings didn't slam the ground. You'd have a big pile of stuff left over.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about that as well.
Didn't happen.